What is up, everybody? It's me, Jrod, the filmmaker, former film major, and frequent fighting gamer from Philadelphia, and we are back once again to talk about the content wars. Now, if you didn't see my first video about the content wars, the too long didn't read is that there are major media corporations, and they are fighting for dominance in the space that is video streaming. In the last few years, more and more people are getting their media from streaming services, and every service wants to have a majority of that expanding market. But now, before this, we got our media from broadcast and cable, and those channels use their programming, which is another word for content, as a way to sell their audience to advertisers. So in essence, the TV shows and movies that you loved on cable and TV growing up were only created to get you to watch ads. Now, one of the exceptions to that rule was premium programming like HBO. In that premium programming model, you paid a subscription fee to get access to premium shows without ads. And this model was better for consumers and creators because consumers got access to quality content without ads, and creators got to make shows that weren't about selling a product. Creators got to focus on making content that captivated audiences and won awards and provoked thought and inspired more shows. It was like an optional bonus for your cable subscription. You know, if you wanted it, you could pay that subscription fee and get access to it. But if you didn't have to pay for it, and you didn't have to see it on your TV. The premium programming model is the predecessor of streaming. And in 2022, 50 years after HBO started, streaming accounts for 34% of all television time, which is actually the same percentage that cable accounts for. In fact, streaming actually edges cable out by 0.4%. So the essential difference between cable and streaming is that cable sells its viewership to different advertisers, and the streamers sell the content directly to the viewer. So the war for dominance in video streaming is dubbed the content wars because these different corporations are fighting a war, and the weapons they're using are their content. Since my last video was almost 3 years ago, there has been a lot of movement in the content wars. When I made that video, HBO Max, Disney Plus, and the Peacock were not even out yet. Paramount Plus was just an idea, and Netflix was the undisputed king of streaming. But heavy is the head because Netflix ran into some problems at the beginning of this year, losing almost 1 million of its subscribers. Now, the reason for this loss in subscribers are cited as many, including competition, recession, and inflation, amongst other reasons. But this was the first major blow to that streamer that is a well-known and trusted one in the space. Even though it's technically one of the newest media corporations in the space, it was one of the first ones to take over video streaming specifically. I would consider this dip to be the writing on the wall, but I don't know if that writing is saying that the market is oversaturated, or that cable is still the norm and streaming is just a bonus, or if the writing is saying that Netflix's content is just no longer up to snuff. Now, I should point out that Netflix actually predicted a 2 million subscriber loss, and their stock actually soared when they found that it was only just under 1 million. Also, Netflix is still dominant in the content wars. They are still on top with 220.67 million global subscribers as of June of this year. Another thing that happened in the 3 years since my last Content Wars video was that the Peacock launched. It was rumored back in 2019, but it only officially launched at the beginning of this year. And I haven't done a full deep dive into the streamer yet because I'm not really watching that many shows over there. The only Peacock original that I've watched in its entirety is Bel-Air, which Bel-Air was actually really good, and I will definitely be back for a second season. But I also just recently finished watching the show Weeds. Now, Weeds is a Showtime original, but it's streaming on the Peacock for some reason, and that's one of the most interesting things about the content wars now, is you never know which streamer is going to find a need for which content, so the content can switch streaming services as often as they need them to. But now that we got through all those updates, we can get into what this video is all about: HBO Max and the Warner Brothers Discovery merger. Now, I reviewed HBO Max a little while ago after that last Content Wars video, and I talked about how it was becoming my favorite streaming service. And I was actually right, because I do consider it my favorite streaming service today. It launched with some content libraries that I was already a huge fan of, like DC originals that were on DC Universe, classic shows like Looney Tunes, Popeye, Tom and Jerry, HBO shows that I already love and their movies. And then there were a few libraries that I have since grown to love, like the Studio Ghibli and Turner Classic Movies content libraries. I watched a lot of movies from these two on my TikTok, where I did a little segment called Fake Film School. And then there's also the anime collection. It was formerly the Crunchyroll section of HBO Max, but now it's just the unnamed and scattered anime collection on HBO Max. And if all of that wasn't enough, the icing on the cake was definitely the HBO Max originals. These original shows come in a tons of different genres and different flavors, but they don't lack on the quality, because original shows like Hacks, Peacemaker, The Flight Attendant, Doom Patrol, and much more, they all deliver as far as quality content goes. And like I said before, this is a war fought on content, and HBO Max has some heavy artillery in their content library. Also, I have to mention that HBO Max had a pretty good year in 2021 despite the pandemic. They made the polarizing decision to add their Warner Brothers films on their streaming service the same day that they premiered in movie theaters. And while this may have hurt some theatrical numbers for some of these films, it definitely helped their streaming numbers and their subscriber numbers. So HBO Max had a pretty good launch, and they had great ratings in a hard time like the pandemic. And despite the news of Netflix losing its subscribers and the stock market being generally just pretty bearish right now, HBO Max was still standing tall in this content wars. But then they went and had a merger. Discovery Plus is another new player in the content wars, but they came into the space as one of the most dominant players from the cable TV side of it. With a content library that commands a cult-like following for shows like 90 Day Fiancé and its dozens of spin-offs, Discovery Channel programs like Shark Week, you got stuff like Food Network, true crime programs on channels like ID, you got the Science Channel, you got much more. And even though these are some of the biggest guns when it comes to cable programming, when it comes to the streaming side, they're more like small fish in an ocean worth of content. So they knew that they needed more content to compete, and thus they began the process of trying to acquire Warner Brothers since May of last year. Prior to this merger, Warner was owned by AT&T after a 2016 acquisition, but AT&T was looking to get out of the content wars and back into the mobile industry that they were known for. So in early April of this year, the merger was official, and Discovery and Warner Media came together into Warner Brothers Discovery.
You do not expect to hear an assessment that grim unless it's from the team behind the Fire Festival or Warner Brothers Discovery. Quick note, the stuff that dreams are made of is a quote from the Maltese Falcon about how the thing that seemed like a priceless treasure was actually worthless garbage that brought chaos and despair to everyone around it. Anyway, good luck with the merger. I'm sure everything's gonna go great.
Now, it would be some time before we see anything come of this merger. Warner Brothers Discovery made plans to merge the corporations and then eventually merge the streaming services. But unfortunately, when we did start to see the results of this merger, it wasn't anything good. David Zaslav, who was the CEO of Discovery, and now after the merger, he's the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, in an effort to impress and ensure his shareholders, he made some cost-cutting measures. Let's call them that. These were layoffs, project cancellations, project slowdowns, and much more. Starting with films like Batgirl and Scoob that were just outright canceled despite the fact that the films were completed. Then later we got the second major blow, which was the removal of some fan favorite shows from the service. These shows included some of like their best animation library like Infinity Train and Close Enough, among a bunch of other great shows. And a lot of the shows they removed had great viewership. Infinity Train personally was one of my favorite Cartoon Network shows that they ever made, and Close Enough was one of my favorite HBO Max original shows that they ever made. The reason why all these shows were purged was so that Warner Brothers Discovery could save some money. Instead of paying royalties to the artists that made these shows, they could cut them completely out of their library and then get a tax cut for it. The purge eventually resulted in a drop in the Warner Brothers Discovery stock, as well as a bunch of bad press, so it seems to have backfired. It wasn't just a bad move from Warner Brothers Discovery, but it potentially set a bad precedent. All streamers cancel shows sometimes. That's something we know. But if a show gets canceled on Netflix, you can usually still watch the past seasons that aired on Netflix. Even in some cases where shows change streamers, like the Marvel Netflix shows moving to Disney+. You can still watch those shows somewhere. To make shows that were original and exclusive to your streaming service, then you use those shows to add subscribers and then money to your streaming service. You let people fall in love with those shows and then take away all access to those shows. It's irresponsible at best, but it is malicious at worst, especially on a streamer that features some content libraries like HBO and Turner Classic Movies, where media archival is an important part of why those libraries exist. Those libraries understood the importance of keeping some of those things preserved so that future generations can eventually see them and take from them whatever they want. Like HBO shows from past generations are still preserved in the HBO section of the streaming service. Because of this, I've been able to watch shows that were like way ahead of my time. Last year I watched The Sopranos and The Wire, even some shows that were a little more recent but I just missed them, like Game of Thrones and The White Lotus. But regardless of what you want to watch, it's not a good sign. It's not a good feeling to think that your favorite content library could just be gutted and purged overnight. That you could wake up and your favorite show could just be gone for no reason with no other legitimate way to watch it. And if that wasn't enough, we also got the cancellation of DC Fandom, a bunch more projects canceled that were either in development or even in production. Some movies just being completely removed from the release schedule. And like I said before, it's been all bad news so far. Even as I was writing this video, we got even more bad news about this Warner Brothers Discovery merger. Apparently, Warner Media is being sued by several of its own shareholders for misrepresenting its own subscriber numbers. The filings that were reported to the SEC overestimated the subscriber count by as much as 10 million, including users that had claimed a free HBO Max and wireless bundle but hadn't actually subscribed to the service. As you might notice, I'm wearing something else. It's a completely different day. I'm actually editing the video, and we have another terrible update about the Warner Brothers Discovery merger. So apparently the most recent thing that they did is they moved to shut down their Warner Brothers TV workshop, where unknown and non-union writers and directors can apply to become part of the TV workshop, learn from industry professionals, and eventually go on to become writers and directors, possibly for Warner Brothers, but also maybe for any other industry professionals. After 40 years, Warner Brothers Discovery has decided to shut down the program. Now, initially, they removed the program and tried to get away without much of a fuss, but a lot of people obviously made a fuss, specifically alumni who went through the program or people who would have potentially applied to the program, which I didn't actually even get a chance to talk about this because it was just a rumor, but it's rumored that Warner Brothers Discovery, Zaslav, and the new management are trying to gut diversity initiatives and even just diverse films on their roster. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that that's just a rumor and that's not true. But with all of the terrible news that Warner Brothers Discovery has been pushing out to this very day, seems like maybe there might be some validity to it. But let's get back to the video. Like I said, HBO Max, it is still my favorite streaming service because of its massive library and easy accessibility. You'd think that the content wars were hard enough on them without the friendly fire of them purging their own content and harming their own content library. And the negative effects of this merger are still being felt. Shows like Craig of the Creek just had its upcoming season cut in half. We got slowdowns on certain DC films like Static, Supergirl, Green Lantern Corps, and Ta-Nehisi Coates' Superman. None of these films have directors yet, and they are all still in jeopardy of being canceled, especially since DC hasn't found its own Kevin Feige or whatever their current plan is. This whole thing has just taught me that the only thing that is certain in the content wars is uncertainty. Your favorite streaming service can sully its own name. The undisputed champ can fall from grace one year and then be back on top the next year. And someone new can actually, a new streamer can come into the space and dominate everyone and become a fan favorite out of nowhere. However, despite how many red flags Warner Brothers Discovery has flown during this merger, it still has a great content library, and I would hate for some of the other artists who are still working on great shows at HBO Max to be punished for the terrible decisions of those at the very top. My favorite DC shows are still on there with Harley Quinn and Doom Patrol. The classic animated library is still there, new and classic films. I still believe in HBO Max, although I don't believe in Warner Brothers Discovery. Although it seems like we're helpless to the irresponsible decisions of these media companies, there are some things that we can do, like supporting some of the artists who may have lost their jobs or their royalties because their show was removed. Some artists like J.G. Quintel, actresses like Leslie Grace, Owen Dennis, who created Infinity Train. If you are a fan of any of these shows, then look into who helped to make that show a reality and how you can help support them and their future endeavors. If you're like me and you're concerned about the accessibility to these shows, you can invest in physical copies where it's applicable, or you can buy digital copies from other retailers like Amazon or YouTube. You know that situations are dire if Amazon becomes a viable option, but other than that, if you can't afford the luxury of buying every single show that you want, I know that can get expensive fast because there are a lot of great shows out there. But you can rent media from your local library, and if they don't have a show you're looking for, you can actually request that they get the show, and they might look into acquiring it specifically for you. Also, I think we can continue to let our dollars speak for us in this sense, because Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery thought that these antics would save them a few dollars, but overall it has cost them a lot. I've said this before, but I think that the content wars is a good thing for the consumer and a good thing for the creator, because quality content is the priority. And although Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery are doing everything in their power to prove me wrong, I think we'll see a course correction. Either that, or we will steer off toward an iceberg until 2025, when Coca-Cola buys Warner Brothers Discovery and they become Warner Discovery Cola Brothers Plus.
Did you hear about Philip Morris, Disney, Fox, AT&T, AOL, Time Warner, PepsiCo, Halliburton, Skynet, Toyota, Trader Joe's?
What about them?
They got acquired by White Whale.
Oh, shit. Well, how many companies are there now? 4?
Yeah, I think that might be our second best option. But that is going to be it for this update on the content wars. I'm going to continue to make these videos when they are, I don't know, whenever I feel like there's a reason to make them, instead of just trying to make this a reoccurring thing when there's really not always reoccurring news about it. But I'm also going to try to get back into doing the streaming service reviews. I had one planned for this year, but it ended up turning into this video. But maybe we'll get that Peacock review or something else, something new that comes along. But yeah, that is going to be it for this episode of the Content Wars update. Yeah, tell me how you feel. What is your favorite streaming service? Do you think that Warner Brothers Discovery actually shot themselves in the foot on this, or do you think it's just a bump in the road? Tell me how you feel about this. Tell me if you feel me. And that's going to be it for this one. Do me a favor and hit me with the 3-hit combo. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And that's going to be it for this one. So I'll see you next time in another new video. Peace out.
Raiden.